When we got evicted, basically all hell broke loose. Movers and the sheriff knocked on the door, and they just started taking our stuff. That's all I remember. I remember these really huge black guys in green overalls coming into the house and grabbing all of our furniture, the dining room table and our chairs and furniture and beds, and I guess they were going to put it into storage. I don't remember much about that day other than my whole family, me, my dad, my mom, my brother, my sister, and myself all standing in the front yard kind of congregating. I remember my mom and my sister running into the house to grab whatever they could to take with us and putting it in the trunk of my dad's car. It was kind of funny. We somehow grabbed our black and white TV set. We didn't let the movers take the TV set. We just piled into my dad's car. It was me, my dad, my mom, my brother closest to me in age, and myself and my sister in this car. And, we were homeless and we didn't know where to go. And we had some neighbors down the street that were nice enough to take us in. They offered to have us come into their house. I don't know if they offered or my dad talked his way into it. I'm pretty sure my dad, the bullshit artist that he was, he talked his way into their house. They agreed to let us come in and stay until they discovered mom and dad had broken into their liquor cabinet and drank all their booze. And stolen some money from them. Then we were kicked out almost immediately. I don't think we were there more than a couple of hours. The next thing I remember after that, all of a sudden we were on this dirt road in another county over. We were way out in the country. Talking about fields around and maple trees, and it was a bright sunny summer day, and we're in this bouncy dirt road, and it was filled with potholes, and my dad's rickety car was shaking and rattling, and I was crying. And all of a sudden we pulled into this guy's driveway, and it was a nice ranch-style home on a couple acres of land. And I remember it had a small pond behind it. And this was back in the days when people in the country kept their doors unlocked in their houses. And it just so happened that the guy that owned the house was a fraternity brother of my father's from college. And when we pulled into his driveway, the man and his wife and his son just happened to be on vacation. And my dad just walked into the house. We basically set up shop in this man's family room at the front of his house. We were all living in his family room, kind of like Eddie, I guess, in Christmas Vacation. There's me, my brother, my sister, my mom, my dad, all living on this guy's couch, watching his color TV. I remember the man came home from vacation with his family and all hell broke loose. And I think my dad talked him into letting us stay, I think. And from what I'm told, we were only there a couple of weeks. The man that owned the house, his name was Mr. Mail. And Mr. Mail was the president of a local bank. And his bank owned this old farmhouse. And it was on like 10 acres of land. And it was just a old dilapidated house. It was like your typical red farmhouse. It was a salt box style farmhouse. And at one time it was a boarding house on a farm, an old dairy farm that had been there in the late 1890s and the early to mid 1900s, like up through like 1950, it was a farm. And nobody had lived in this house for like 30 years or something. This is 1970, so I don't think anybody had lived in this house since like 1945 or something, like maybe 25 years, but anybody had lived in it. And it was old and dilapidated. The red paint had faded. The roof needed repairs. There were broken windows, missing screens. There was no furnace in the house. There was no electricity, no running water. And Mr. Mail worked it out that he would let us stay in this house. Made some arrangements with the bank and got the house fixed up for us. I remember this whole crew of guys coming and painting the house and patching up the roof and getting the water turned on. And the city got the water and the electricity turned on. but we didn't have a furnace. We had no heat, and we didn't have any furniture. All of our furniture was in storage. After we were evicted, the sheriff had it all impounded or put into a storage facility somewhere in Cleveland. And we lived in this farmhouse. The first night we moved in there, I remember we didn't have any furniture, so we all slept on the floor in the living room. My sister tried to make it seem like we were camping. She laid down a blanket on the floor and folded it over so it was a little padded, and made a pillow out of stuffed a pillowcase filled with blankets or towels, and she slept next to me on the floor. And of course we had our black and white TV set, so we got to watch TV. That's always important when you've got TV and when you're homeless. I still think that's funny. We grabbed the TV. We lived there from the summer of 1970 until the summer of 1971. And then my dad got a job. He finally got a job working in advertising. He worked in advertising sales for a very small paper called the Geauga Times-Leader. And it was a very small paper. We moved to the town of Chardon in the following summer. We moved into an old colonial-style home built in the early 1900s. This house was just dark and cold and drafty. This is where some of the worst things happened in this house. I don't remember much about the farmhouse, but I remember a lot of bad things happening in this house. We destroyed this house. We had 2 dogs. We had a beagle and a border collie mix, and we didn't house train these dogs. Nobody even bothered to house train the dogs. They never walked them. They just let them shit and piss all over the house. And this new house in Chardon had these beautiful, varnished hardwood floors, and we just let the dogs piss all over the first floor, just everywhere. I mean, the ironic thing or the bizarre thing is they put newspapers down to get the dogs to piss and shit on the newspapers, but they wouldn't walk them. Nobody had the motivation to house train these dogs. This is where my dad began becoming physically abusive to my mother. I don't remember him hitting her prior to this. Mom and Dad got into a fight in our kitchen. And this house was built in the early 1900s and had those really hard plaster walls with the wood slat reinforcements in it. And the story goes is that my mom picked up a knife and raised it over her head and tried to bring it down on my dad. And the point of it just got into his forehead, and he pushed her out of the way or smacked her out of the way, and she almost went right through a wall. They came home from school that day, and there was this huge hole, like the impression. It was about this long and about this wide, where my mother's body had gone backwards into the wall, and it had really screwed up her back. What they did to cover up this hole in the house was they just took a page from a newspaper and pinned it over the hole to cover it up. And I remember when we moved out of the house, we're all hoping that the landlord wouldn't notice that we had knocked a hole in the wall.
I was 7 years old when we moved into the Downey Manor apartments in the summer of 1972. We lived there until I finished second grade in June of 74. The weekends were the worst when we lived in these apartments. It always seemed to rain on the weekends. The preceding winds of the rainstorms coming off of Lake Erie would create an updraft, turning the leaves of the silver maple trees outside my bedroom window upside down so you could see their shiny underbelly. When the storms blew in, I'd be filled with dread knowing that I'd be locked inside the tiny apartment with my parents. They always got smashed on the weekends, and they'd have these knockdown, drag-out brawls. It was a nightmare. One evening, just before sunset, a massive storm with thunder and lightning seemed to hover over our apartment building. The fight started in the living room. I was hiding in my bedroom. I heard glass breaking, my mom screaming, my dad yelling. The fight went down the hall, past my bedroom door, and terminated in their bedroom. I was so small and they were so large, it was like giants fighting in the hall. I sat in my bed with my hands over my ears, sobbing, hoping they would just stop. Then, I heard our apartment door slam shut and there was silence. As I slowly opened my bedroom door, I looked up and down the hall. It was a horrific scene. The carnage stretched from the living room down the hall to their bedroom. Our 2 ceramic living room lamps were shattered on the living room floor. The bookcase outside my bedroom door in the hallway had been tipped over, leaving books strewn across the floor. Their bedroom door was open. I crept out of my room and into theirs. Dad was nowhere to be found. Mom was sitting on the edge of their bed crying, her face and arms black and blue. Their dresser had been tipped over and the light next to their bed smashed. Mom hugged me and cried. She apologized. To this day, every time the preceding winds of a rainstorm coming in off the lake blow the silver maple leaves upside down, I'm transported back to that apartment with giants fighting in the hall.
I just can't get over how beautiful this town still is after all these years. I haven't lived here in 25 years. I just really miss this town a lot. There's a lot of good memories in this town. There's a lot of bad memories too. I mean, this is where things were their worst, and this is where things were the best, where things got better. But this is also the town where my mom turned her life around. This is where my mom and dad got divorced, and my mom got a job, and she bought a house, and she held true to her promise. She promised me if things didn't get better, she'd divorce Dad, buy a house for the 2 of us, and get me a dog. And she did both. And I'm grateful to her for that.